Hi, so I'm going to be picking up where I alluded to in the part 1 of the Comey corruption, where I mentioned tying a Ray Dalio, who was the founder and most recent CEO of Bridgewater, to Comey, and then eventually you either start to see why I link this to Sandy Hook on your own, or I'm sure I'll vocalize or accentuate my ideas on that. I'm going to bring you to a tweet that Mr. Dalio put out just on November the 7th this year, where he says a good principle is don't believe everything you read in the newspapers. You see, Mr. Dalio has his, he wrote a book. It's all about principles. You'll hear this a lot from Mr. Dalio, principles. When you start investigating the content behind the principles, you can sort of start to wonder. So just to establish, and there will be links in the description box to everything that I show you, but to establish your understanding that he is affiliated with Mr. Comey. Of course, it's a well-known and documented fact that James Comey, former FBI director, worked at Bridgewater. But whenever he was fired, when Comey was fired, Ray Dalio had to come out and put a tweet out on May the 10th, 2017 this year, to speak out about that, where he says, I would not feel good about myself if I did not make clear that I have come to know and admire James Comey as a man of integrity and a hero, i.e. he is a man who will sacrifice his own well-being for the greater purpose. I'm going to stop right there and just say, sometimes when people speak, it's very literal, and people say what they mean, and they mean what they say, and it's very unilateral. It's very one-dimensional. Other times, particularly when you're engaged with people who are fairly bright, you may not even understand that when they're talking with you, they're talking with you on a level that an average person would take things being said at face value. However, there is a double entendre, there is a double meaning, there is more of a figurative, perhaps, as well as literal meaning to what they're saying. I believe Mr. Dalio does this perpetually. He perpetually does this. He does this in his TED Talks, he does this in his interviews, he does this throughout his book, he does this in his mission statement for Bridgewater, which I'll go over. So go back there. He is a man of high principles operating in a low principles environment. Or keyword principles there again. Heroes typically get crucified or martyred in the end. I'd be concerned if I were Mr. Comey for him saying that one. Jim knew that when he took the job, but like good soldiers called to battle, felt the responsibility to serve. He deserves our thanks rather than scorn. Last year, and these are not in any sort of dated order because you can see I have a lot to get through, and I don't know, for the sake of time, and I've gotten so far deep into just researching this and went down through so many rabbit holes just in researching names, going back to Sandy Hook, and then coming across the information as it was presented today with the school shooting, with the shootings that in multiple places in California, which is interesting because I document like where my resources are, which I put in the description box here. I don't know if you can see this right here, but it's like The Guardian, for November the 14th, 2017. That would be today. Northern California shooting deaths at school. And it wasn't just right before that I had pulled up The Guardian for 2012 December. White House, Obama, gun control, Newtown. Patterns. Mr. Dalio says principles, I say patterns. James Comey's Dalio moment. This was back in November 3rd, 2016. FBI Director letter to Congress echoes his time at Bridgewater, insiders say, and the principles Ray Dalio preaches. We're going to go to the webpage. I encourage you to go, and definitely have in your mind that double entendre that I just mentioned. Ray Dalio, the founder of Bridgewater Associates, famously lives and runs his business by 210 management principles. One of his former employees, FBI Director James Comey, proved he was a diligent student of Dalio's controversial doctrine, as the latest bombshell in a scandal-plagued presidential election cycle shows. Comey broke with Justice Department policy and opinion on Friday by informing lawmakers of a cache of new emails relevant to the closed investigation into Hillary Clinton's private email server. For those of you who've been following along, you know the events as they transpired when Comey came out in, I think it was July, wasn't it? July. Said, nope, Clinton did all these things wrong, and treating all these, and then no one will prosecute her. And then he came out in November and kind of changed his tune. There was obviously something going on. Mr. Comey was obviously dancing with different entities, of which was pulling him in which direction. His disclosure upended the presidential race drew stinging rebukes from senior officials and may have violated federal law. According to the Democrats' top senator, it also perfectly adhered to several of Dalio's principles, among them principle number 1, trust in truth. As I get older, I realize truth is so subjective. Principle 210, don't try to please everyone. I like that one. As FBI Director Comey made a breathtakingly rash and irresponsible decision, declared the New York Times editorial board, yet as a Bridgewater alumnus, his choice to inform Congress reflected Dalio's principles. If anything, the hedge fund's ex-chief counsel didn't go far enough. No, Dalio supported and contributed to the Clintons, this FYI. Lots of Excel documents, hedge fund list. I tell you, I did the rabbit hole and how deep it goes. I am not joking. If you go into the WikiLeaks and you look at emails, you can actually download documents which have attachments which have tons of information. So this one here is the hedge fund email list. And there you see Bridgewater Pure Alpha Fund 1. There's lots more to uncover on that one. I could see where the internet's been scrubbed, and even WikiLeaks has been scrubbed of certain information, because when I first stumbled upon this several months ago, and I kind of started making this connection, I can't really tell you when, there was a publication in the WikiLeaks that talked about Ray Dalio's accolades to Comey that I couldn't find today. It might be in there, I didn't find it today. But yeah, there he is. 203 area code. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I could get off topic so easy with this, but I don't know what my time is. I don't know how long I'm going to make these. I think I just want to go and put the information out there. I encourage you to go to the description box and read and click on the links and read for yourself and piece it together because, okay. The principles are Bridgewater's sacred tenets. It's 10 commandments. Okay, give or take a couple hundred. Dalio credits the firm's remarkable longevity, 40 plus years, assets roughly 150 billion, and performance consistently strong to its equally unusual culture. The firm demands what they call is radical transparency, in the form of videotaped meetings, open performance reviews, etc., to foster a meritocracy of ideas. Dalio explains to financial elites at the Milken Global Conference last spring. It's been operating this way for 40 years, and it's the basis of our success, the billionaire continued. It's not theoretical. Comey spent 3 years at the Westport, Connecticut-based company, which is the world's 17 miles from Sandy Hook, which is the world's largest hedge fund firm. Bridgewater chose not to comment for this story. I'll just say, too, that this year, I believe it was in May, and there's a hedge fund article in here that I'll get to, Mr. Dalio stepped down from his position in the firm. And as recently as this week, there are sexual misconduct allegations coming out within Bridgewater. When he joined in 2010, Comey had previously served as U.S. Attorney for the New York Southern District, in other words, as Wall Street's top cop, Deputy Attorney General, and Lockheed Martin's General Counsel. Bridgewater has a weak track record for integrating senior-level hires, but Comey proved a better cultural fit than most. I remember one client call. In comes this towering figure from the Department of Justice. He sits on the floor, recalls Manish Shanpag, who overlapped with Comey during a 5-year tenure at Bridgewater. Comey's message was, I'm here to learn. The 6'8" former prosecutor is exactly the type of person one would want running the FBI. Bridgewater helped shape Shanbag too. He now runs an unleveraged risk parity type strategy at Greenline Partners. I'm going to have to make a list for all these little tidbits of information along the way so I can go back and research more. Comey, he says, is a phenomenal guy of the highest integrity. From what little I knew, my first instinct is that political meddling isn't Jim Comey at all. Now remember, when these articles are being floated out there, you have a lot of shit hitting the fan with Mr. Comey and his integrity and what he's doing. So, in that view, facing new potential evidence in a case of great public interest, the FBI director made an apolitical choice for transparency, incurring a massive political fallout. For Jim, Shanbag says, I imagine he had to decide, do I go with this messy process where I keep people more informed, abnormal transparency, and messiness marked Comey's handling of the Clinton investigation from his chastening, extremely careless remark in July while arguing for no charges to Friday's supplement. Principle 4, be extremely open. Now remember, we kind of deal with the Dr. Seuss opposite day world. Sometimes it's the exact opposite, I think, of what these people are saying. You have to know when to apply the exact opposite rule. Openness leads to truth and trust. Dalio's manifesto states, it's simple, just don't filter. Last spring, the hedge fund titan acknowledged exceptions to this rule, for example, with your wife. But the philosophy applies well beyond company confines to society at large, he continued. Now see, where this gets very interesting is that Mr. Dalio is connected to people who present very compelling symposiums on things like the greatest generational impact, the open neuroscience movement as an emerging knowledge commons. What does that mean? Neuroscience is transforming. Brain data collected in multitudes of individuals at institutions around the world are being openly shared, moved from office desks and personal storage devices to institutionally supported cloud systems and public repositories, effectively bringing neuroscience into the area of big data. This is an important evolution in neuroscience, since the value of open data sharing has not always been recognized. Are you following this? This is in part to help probably unkind agents into your mind. There's very few things that at the end of a lifetime you have for yourself that no one can take from you. One is your history, what you've done, your soul, which I do believe we all have. And then your mind. What goes on in your mind? Someone can't steal your thoughts, can they? Or can they? Can people reprogram your thoughts? Yeah. And this is how they learn to do it. Study. I'll go ahead and post a link to this interesting, they use the same terminology. It is truth commonly asserted that research scientists participate in an ethos of knowledge sharing by virtue of customary norms and practice within the scientific community. However, the reality in many scientific research settings can be quite different. The area of neuroscience research provides a timely case study of an incipient knowledge commons in the process of formation against a background of something fierce, sometimes fierce competition for repudiational reward and results, partly because of a new large-scale intergovernmental initiatives. You really have to look at these words. And sources of funding. Situations like mass shootings and reaction would be a very interesting scientific research project, wouldn't it? Yeah, probably. And then to get funding and the pushes of letting everything go through, if you shake hands and say, well, we'll work with you to, it'll help you because of gun legislation. It can help us, it can help you. We can get, lots of people to donate lots of money afterwards, because that's what people do. Out of the kindness of their own hearts, just throw money at the dead people. Their families, efforts. This is a very interesting article. Fact sheet, Brain Initiative, available at the www.whitehouse.gov press office. Fact sheet, Brain Initiative. Do we really want the White House to be studying our brain? This is it. It is fair to state that the neuroscience research community is in a process of active institutional change on local, regional, and global levels. This chapter describes what some in the neuroscience research community are calling the open neuroscience movement. It situates this case study within the Knowledge Commons research framework by focusing on how institutional actors cooperate or not to form a knowledge commons and under what circumstances cooperation can occur. This case study of sharing neuroscience data can shed light on enabling conditions for the emergence of these types of governance arrangements. It may be particularly useful in illuminating the dynamics in research environments dominated by ethos of competitive, individual lab-based achievement. I've mentioned on more than one occasion in previous videos that I feel like we're just lab rats, that we are just part of this scientific experiment. If you haven't watched The Truman Show, I encourage it. Awesome show. And everything that I've followed up with to know about Mr. Dalio, his connections, the money aspect, his connections to government, and what's gone on, to me, it seems like it's very crystal clear. It's very crystal clear of why these things happen. Okay, so according to Ostrom and Hess, the so-called action arena, quote, action arena. Can you guys see this? You know, if it's very annoying for me to read to you guys, like, and you can just tell me, like, Anna, like, we don't need you to read, just put the shit in the description box and we'll read it. Because this is going to take, like, hours upon hours. I just feel this is very important. Because it keeps happening, guys. It keeps happening. We had the Las Vegas situation. Now we have this other California situation. Eventually, yeah, you have people that are going to do copycats and so forth. But, yeah, I'm going back to Sandy Hook. I'm going back to this because I do believe that there is a connection. I do. So the so-called action arena, that is at the heart of the institutional analysis and development framework, is an appropriate place to start when trying to think through the challenges of creating a new form of commons. The open neuroscience movement is characterized by desperate, no, it's not desperate, but it should be desperate, institutional actors who have a common recognition the importance of sharing data. Yet even when this acknowledgement is accompanied by a commitment to open access to research data by major actors, there are still many impediments to the formation of a widely available, accessible, and comprehensive neuroscience data commons. By focusing primarily on action situations and actors within this particular action arena, this chapter also addresses why, despite prevailing disincentives, there is growing impetus for broader participation in what this chapter will refer to as neuroscience data commons. As noted elsewhere, the primary actors or stakeholders in a knowledge commons include the individual scientists who both generate and use data, the institutions they work for or with, the research funders, and those representing the public who benefit from, and as taxpayers sometimes indirectly fund the research. Methodologically, this chapter buttresses its observations with interviews of selected actors within key institutions that are attempting to bring forward this emerging knowledge commons. The interviewees include representatives of the stakeholder groups. The chapter first outlines some of the benefits, then some of the primary obstacles to participation in the disarray of a neuroscience data commons. It concludes with some suggestions about how to expand a neuroscience data commons that will allow scientists to share data more optimally than current institutional arrangements permit. I'm not going to click on those links because it's going to go into overview of the emerging neuroscience data commons. In spite of the vigorous development of neuroinformatics and the many techniques for data collation, archiving, annotation, and distribution developed over the last decade, the amount of neuroscience data available is only a small fraction of the total. The solution depends upon commitments from both data providers across neuroscience and funding agencies to encourage the open archiving and sharing of data. Transparency. Brett Catherine Michael defined knowledge commons as arrangements for overcoming social dilemmas related to sharing and producing information, innovation, and creative works. And they further define the term knowledge as a set of intellectual and cultural resources. These scholars characterize a knowledge commons as an institutional arrangement of resources involving a group or community of people. The governance of a commons addresses obstacles related to substantial sharing and is based upon the foundational recognition that multiple uses do not always lead to depletion or scarcity of those resources. The research on knowledge commons is a subset of the large body of scholarship on open innovation. To be sure, some intellectual resources can be affected negatively by those who free ride on the ideas and efforts of others. This behavior can undermine creativity by innovation, by making it more difficult for individual artists and inventors to benefit from their efforts. And of course, this policy concern forms the rationale for exclusive rights such as copyrights and patents, as well as other forms of intellectual property. See, I think that the problem is more so in being sued, posse comitatus, maybe, you know. Oh, I have to. For example, legal scholar Carol Rose sees many surprises in commons-based arrangements for resource management, especially in the area of knowledge resources. Tragic examples such as acid rain are counterbalanced by surprising examples such as neglected disease consortiums or Wikipedia. And unlike the late political scientist Ostrom, who tended to view a commons of shared resources management as involving a limited community of participants with rather defined membership, Rose views some resource sharing arrangements as having porous rather than fixed boundaries for participation. Well, that would be, and when I read that and say that, well, porous rather than fixed boundaries, which means it does seep into every faction of people who are going to make money off of an event. And I think some people do it because they think that it's somehow they're helping. I do. Some people think, I don't know. It's too easy for me to get off on that topic, so I'm not going to do that right now. Rose's perspective on commons-based resource management aligns well with the definition of openness propounded by Fleischman. the capacity to relate to a resource by accessing and using it. In other words, the openness of a resource corresponds to the extent to which there are barriers to possession or use. Thus, the IAD framework, originally created by Ostrom, can be adapted not only to analyze emerging rather than pre-existing collaborative arrangements, but also open science initiatives such as the open neuroscience movements discussed here. Open neuroscience movement, ever since the Human Genome Project, HGP, demonstrated the power of sharing research results, calls to make the growing banks of brain data, analytic tools, and protocols publicly and freely accessible have been increasing in strength and visibility. Most recently, they pervade the texts released by the Committee for the U.S.-funded BRAIN Initiative and other big data projects emerging in neuroscience. The ethos of the open neuroscience movement, let me just stop right there as I think of Pokemon Go. You think that was just some sort of fun game that you can just play for no reason. It's all about what you're going to see this unfold. This may seem painful to those of you who maybe are less kind of academic or whatnot, but hopefully you'll see where I'm going with this. It's important to grasp this foundation for understanding, okay? The ethos of the open neuroscience movement is to disseminate the data quickly in a format that is accessible, useful, and unrestricted, and encourage others to use it. This type of collaborative, large-scale, basic scientific research has precedents outside of biology, including the CERN Particle Accelerator Project. It's another video, guys, another one. I'm sure maybe they mentioned HARP in here. I haven't read this previously, just so you know. And the Hubble telescope. To be sure, the success of the HGP, which was biology's first large-scale project, stemmed from strong leadership from the funders, the shared sense of the importance of the task, and the willingness of the researchers involved to seed individual achievements for the collective good. Globalism, right? The collective good. In addition to government agencies funding neuroscience research, this era of big data is notable for the involvement of nonprofit organizations, including private foundations, NPOs, that's nonprofit organizations, and of other newer entrants into the science arena, colloquially dubbed big philanthropy. Openly accessible neuroscience data is valuable, and I agree with that. I'm not suggesting that we as a human species shouldn't define a better understanding of how we think and react. But whenever I see who's involved and the outcomes and where it's going and the political push and the lack of individuality and decision making and the true peril of falling under an establishment that controls what you think, how you think, and predicates everything based on how to make money from you, then it's a big problem. Okay, it says ATA sets from neuroimaging studies generally contain more information than one lab, has the methodological and interpretive expertise to extract data, therefore sharing maximizes the utility of data and skills of researchers, accelerating the pace of, next page, investigations around particular questions, and therefore a crucial imperative form of scientific point of view to increase statistical rigor and open up interpretive possibilities. Interview participant Dana, Executive Director of Data Commons, LLC. I wonder if they're on that list. Data Commons, LLC. This is kind of, I'm just going to go. Hedge fund. I'm going to just do, Data Commons, LLC. And that's what I do, Bostrom, B-O-S-T-R-O-M, let's see. to see how closely these people are related. No, doesn't look like her name's on this for that. Okay. That's how I find connections a lot of the times, just have something else open like this. Open neuroscience advocates claim furthermore that neuroscience research yields enormous quantities of complex data at various levels of study, and open access to data in shared repositories offers the potential to integrate, reuse, or reanalyze data. Thus, data sharing not only affords much greater sample sizes and therefore better quality of data, correcting for effects of noise or other errors, but it also becomes an economic imperative at a moment in which funding institutions and universities have limited resources. Should we take a break from this and go down and tie this back into how Comey is relative? Oh, well, maybe not. Actors in neuroscience data action arena. Figure 1. The actors. Let me pull this down. Well, we have government and a very big one. Universities, all mostly philanthropic and non-profits. For-profit companies. And this is the Allen Institute. I guess I'm going to have to research that a little bit better, huh? Institutional incentives to participate in neuroscience data commons. I'm going to write that down too, Allen Institute, because I'll forget that. Let's see, we go through this. All right, you're like, Anna, why? Why does that have to do with Comey? So you get the kind of flavor of what's going on here. They go through principles. Comey modeled, be extremely open. Comey modeled it as a public official, according to Harvard professor and leadership Robert Keegan. During the Bush administration, Comey refused to sign off on post-9/11 surveillance programs while acting as Attorney General during John Ashcroft's hospitalization. Yeah, I don't know what happened to Comey. Did I mention that Mueller was the FBI director during 9/11? Yeah. Special prosecutor, special counsel right now to the whole Russia thing. I think he made a mistake, says Keegan, who studied Bridgewater for his latest book on everyone's culture. Was Comey actually being transparent in communicating what he did to the House? Did he make clear enough? I don't know anything much about the actual content of these emails. Comey was not honest. He really wasn't. Was he transparent enough that no one should come to any quick conclusions about what they contain? Comey's inscrutable message and silence thereafter wouldn't pass the bar at Bridgewater, Keegan continues, and it wouldn't. This is just a piece, at time relevance to help him clear him. Principle 9. Recognize that effective, innovative thinkers are going to make mistakes. Principle 17. When you experience pain, remember to reflect. Dalio writes much about pain. Yeah, he does. Bridgewater and the FBI are two different institutions, the soon-to-be director included, but I promise you I will carry those values with me and try to spread them as far as I can within the institution. All right, Mr. Comey. And then there's the $3 million payout. This was from Monday, July 8th, 2013. James Comey, nominated to be the next director of the FBI, will receive a payout of $3.07 million from hedge fund Bridgewater Associates if he is confirmed by the U.S. Senate, which we know he was. Comey, who left his position as Bridgewater's general counsel in January, would receive the money as a full payment of his interests in the company's profit-sharing plan, according to a questionnaire filed with the Senate Judiciary Committee. Should Comey be confirmed by the Senate, the money would be paid prior to that date, and I assumed the position as FBI director according to the 32-page questionnaire signed by Comey and dated June 26. Now, you're going to hear some names that you hear today going on with the Russia investigation that are talked about in this July 2013. Russell Sherman, a spokesman for Bridgewater, didn't have an immediate comment on the payout. Comey, a former deputy attorney general under President George W. Bush, was nominated by President Barack Obama on June 21st to take over the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He is scheduled to testify Tuesday in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee for the nomination. Iowa Senator Charles Grassley, the top Republican on the panel, has said he plans to look into Comey's work at Bridgewater, a Westport, Connecticut firm that is the world's largest hedge fund. Grassley, who complimented Comey's work on national security issues and his independence, said in a June statement that he remained interested in his recent work on the hedge fund industry. Comey already is facing questions from civil liberties groups and some Senate Democrats over his role in the Bush administration's use of harsh interrogation techniques on terrorism suspects, as well as recent disclosures about the scope of the federal government secret surveillance programs. Still, lawmakers on both sides have lauded Obama's pick of lawyer who also served as the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York after he departed the Bush administration. The General Counsel of Lockheed Martin. Gee, who else was associated with Lockheed Martin? Oh, I know. It was that guy that shot up everybody in Vegas. The circle. And it is a circle. Senator Patrick Leahy, a Vermont Democrat and chairman of the Judiciary Panel, called for the swift and respectful confirmation of Comey by the Senate. Comey, if confirmed, would replace current FBI Director Robert Mueller, who has held his job since September 2001. Yeah. Maybe some of you know these facts already. July 7, 2016. A story from FBI Director James Comey's time at Bridgewater perfectly illustrates the hedge fund's emphasis on radical transparency. I like how they're trying to twist and manipulate that. He's trying to be transparent. When he was an executive at Bridgewater Associates, the world's largest hedge fund firm, from 2010 to 2013, he was in a culture of radical transparency, unlike that of any organization of its size. Politico, it's funny because they do flip sometimes. I've even heard some, not many, from the CNN side. Tried to be more reasonable, but then you always have to wonder, when the alligator starts smiling at you, he might not be smiling. He might just be showing you his teeth. In a new Politico article by Garrett M. Graff, Comey offers insight into his time at Ray Dalio's hedge fund, including a strange scenario where a 25-year-old employee confronted him after a meeting. Graff writes, "It was just weeks after he joined Bridgewater, whose corporate culture of high-achieving intellectuals resembles a moneyed management cult that shares more in common with the 1970s personal improvement fad, EST, than it does with a typical Wall Street firm. That Comey was cornered by a similarly new 25-year-old employee. The junior associate interrogated the former Justice Department official on a seemingly illogical stance that Comey had taken in an earlier meeting. My initial reaction was, what? You? Kid, you are asking me that question. I was Deputy Attorney General of the United States. I was General Counsel of a huge, huge company. No 25-year-old is going to ask me about my logic, he recalled. Then I realized I'm at Bridgewater. Dalio founded Bridgewater from his apartment in 1975, but didn't begin developing his intense management culture until the mid-1990s. He told Business Insider in March he found that codifying his investment principles brought him success, and so he should do the same with the way he wanted his company to run. It resulted in Principles. It's this book. The link will be in the description box. A manual of 210 lessons that all Bridgewater employees must learn. Here's a primer on what it's like to work at the hedge fund. Remember a long time ago earlier when I mentioned double entendre? Think about perhaps a double meaning. You're going to want to do that right now. Radical transparency at Bridgewater, the basics. Everything is recorded. All meetings and interviews, with few exceptions, are filmed and made public to all employees. Everyone follows the principles. Each employee has a copy of Dalio's exhaustive management philosophy guide, which contains 210 lessons. The people that come out of here and work, and this is one of the articles, they're from like Harvard, Yale. They're from Ivy League places. These aren't just walk-ins off the street that don't have any sense. Complete honesty means nothing held back. Talking behind someone's back makes someone a slimy weasel. Well, Mr. Dalio, I am not speaking behind your back. You are welcome to be looking at my video right now. Okay? Thank you. According to the principles, and is a fireable offense. All tensions, even with Dalio himself, must be brought to that person. Well, that's interesting because some people have been bringing some things out in the open this week. Employees have baseball cards. Employees use an internal iOS app called Dot Collector to rate each other's attributes. Averages are collected in baseball cards for each member of Bridgewater. I'm not saying that doesn't sound a little bit like yeah, go to the movies. I think one of his sons is a director, as a matter of fact. Wonder if he had anything to do with that, the Cagness movie. I forget the name right now. Pain plus reflection equals progress. The above equation is fundamental to Dalio's principles. Each employee uses an iOS app called the Pain Button to log negative work experiences for the purpose of later discussion and resolution. Comey said it took him 3 months to adjust to Bridgewater, at which point he appreciated the hardline culture. In a video testimonial on Bridgewater's website, Comey said, "You combine that intelligence, the depth and almost 360-degree vector of the questioning. There is no more demanding, probing questioning environment in the world than Bridgewater." Link in the description box. So, here we have on December 22nd, 2016, someone, Wall Street Journal, and I'm sure it was approved. The world's largest hedge fund is building an algorithmic model from its employees' brains. Yeah, remember that little excerpt I just read to you before I was reading from? That study. Bridgewater wants day-to-day management, hiring, firing, decision-making to be guided by software that doles out instructions. Deep inside Bridgewater Associates, the world's largest hedge fund firm, software engineers are working on a secret project that founder Ray Dalio has sometimes called the Book of the Future. The goal is technology that would automate most firms' management. It would represent accumulation of Mr. Dalio's life work to build Bridgewater into an altar to radical openness and place that can endure without him. I think I clicked on this and I didn't have, I don't have any more access to that. Do I have that? Maybe I can repeat back to that. I think I had the larger file. Let's see. March 5th, 2017. Now this is an ex-employee. Note a hint of turmoil in Bridgewater's recipe for success. This is Mr. Dalio. It's not every workplace where a top executive is accused of lying on a video for every employee to see. It is also unusual for a company founder to fire an employee in a group email and then later dismiss it as simply a joke. We're going to start seeing some pathological things getting exposed. So you'll see that bridge that I made between Sandy Hook, Adam Lanza, and the Newtown Elementary School shooting, that bridge gets much more stable when you kind of get into seeing the dynamics of the psychology that goes on in this group, okay? At Bridgewater Associates, the world's largest hedge fund, that is how Ray Dalio, the firm's 67-year-old billionaire founder, runs things. Mr. Dalio's firm is built on a foundation of radical transparency, a philosophy laid out in principles and employee handbook of sorts that he wrote. He attributes Bridgewater's investing success over more than 4 decades to that philosophy. But the firm's culture has also fed undercurrents that have at times rattled employees, including senior executives. Interviews with dozens of former Bridgewater employees and contractors over the past year suggest an environment that can be intimidating, where every meeting is videotaped and employees are encouraged to openly challenge one another, sometimes in potentially humiliating ways. The firm's latest management shakeup came last week and included the departure of John Rubinstein, a former senior Apple executive nicknamed the Podfather for his work on the iPod. Should we go back and talk about Vault 7? WikiLeaks dumps, surveillance, data collection. Boy, wouldn't it be interesting then if you connected those dots to see how someone with Mr. Dalio's mindset would be fundamentally interested in that. In announcing that Mr. Rubinstein was leaving just 10 months after joining Bridgewater as a co-chief executive, the firm said he was not a cultural fit. Fitting in can indeed be difficult at Bridgewater, where as many as a third of the 1,500 employees leave within 2 years of being hired, and some of Mr. Dalio's top lieutenants have been shuffled around, including David McCormick, who was promoted last week from president to co-chief executive, a title we previously held several years ago, and Greg Jensen, who was removed from his co-chief executive role last year and replaced by Mr. Rubinstein. Despite the firm's many years, and I wanted to cross-reference these names. They're common names. I don't want to jump to conclusions of who they are. Mr. Dalio's management style continues to raise questions about how hands-on he will be in the future. His announcement last week that he would step down as co-chief executive but remains as chairman and co-chief investment officer was not expected to quiet those questions. Every time he's stepping back, he may believe that he may want to do that, but then someone else does something he doesn't like. He can't resist stepping back in, says Eric Gordon, a professor at the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business. Mr. Dalio has spent a great deal of time over the past year defending Bridgewater's culture in public appearances and posts on LinkedIn. In an email statement on Sunday, the firm said the New York Times had presented a biased and distorted picture of Bridgewater. It also cited an invitation from the Times seeking Mr. Dalio's participation in a conference this week to discuss the firm's strong culture that encourages creativity, excellence, and innovation. Yet, 4 former Bridgewater employees described 2 episodes from 5 years ago that they said indicate how erratic that culture can be. The former employees asked not to be identified because they had signed non-disclosure agreements with the firm. You'll see later how someone was paid off million. These people have big money to pay people off. People get paid, they don't talk. Eileen Murray, another co-chief executive and a longtime member of Bridgewater's management committee, was at the center of one of the episodes, which came to be known as the firm as Eileen Lies, according to the 4 former employees. James B. Comey. This gets really weird. James B. Comey, Bridgewater's general counsel at that time, and now the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, was responsible for investigating the matter. Over several interrogation sessions that the former employees describe as intense, Mr. Comey's questioning focused on whether Ms. Murray had been dishonest about her dealings with a lower-level employee regarding his employment at the firm. In the end, the lower-level employee was dismissed while Ms. Murray was admonished but kept her job, even though several top executives on Bridgewater's management committee, including Mr. Comey, thought she was not telling the truth, the former employees said. Videos of the interrogations were edited and later rolled out in a serialized fashion, a Bridgewater version of a reality TV show. Again, go back to Truman. Said the former employees who saw them. The videos also serve as a case study as part of Homework, a firm practice in which employees review and analyze recorded meetings and internal debates. Mr. Dalio defended Ms. Murray at the time and said the matter involved something more like a white lie than a serious infraction, the former employees said. Bridgewater said on Sunday that the episode showed how seriously we take even trivial misrepresentations, and that the management committee later apologized to Eileen for the situation. The firm said that within the publication of the details in the Times, a mountain has been made out of a molehill, adding that it was damaging to Eileen's character. Efforts to reach Ms. Murray through LinkedIn were unsuccessful, and a Bridgewater spokesman said she had nothing to add. The Eileen Lies episode occurred around the same time that Mr. Dalio stepped back from the firm's day-to-day operations to allow Mr. Jensen, at the time another co-chief executive of Mr. Dalio's heir to apparent, to play a more active role. Mr. Jensen remains on the management committee. But when a few employees did not complete homework assignments, Mr. Dalio stepped back in, sending a company-wide email firing at least one of those employees, according to 3 people who saw the email. The email shocked some at the firm, which currently manages about $150 billion for around 350 large clients like pension funds and sovereign investors. Sovereign investor. In a meeting with top managers after the episode, a number of Bridgewater executives complained that Mr. Dalio had made a rash decision, according to the former employees. Mr. Dalio later said that the episode was not meant to be taken seriously and that he was merely trying to shake things up. These people said, in the end, no one was fired. On Sunday, Bridgewater described the episode as a teaching moment, saying that it was an unsettling mistake that Ray made and that he appreciated being held accountable. Both episodes occurred about a year after Mr. Dalio began to sell some of his equity stake in Bridgewater back to the firm as part of a long-term plan to step back as manager, according to an internal firm document reviewed by the Times. Bridgewater's 3 main investment funds were all up last year. All-Weather Fund 2 was up 12%, the Optimal Fund 7%, and the Pure Alpha 2 Fund 2.4%. Those were probably important to kind of look into. Bridgewater has also pointed to the praise it has garnered over the years for its unique culture and management practices. The firm notes that in 2013 it was the focus of a case study by Harvard Business School, Mr. Dalio's alma mater, that examined how radical transparency philosophy had contributed to its record-beating performance. Bridgewater's emphasis on culture is unusual for an investment firm. Many employees' day-to-day tasks include little discussion about specific trades and are instead more procedural and involve challenging peers and testing one another's logic in meetings. Bridgewater said in its statement on Sunday that employees spend about 15 minutes a day on homework, including watching tapes of events, and that the firm's process of getting multiple opinions from employees was done to test the logic behind key decisions, to ensure that they are stress tested. In past interviews, Mr. Dalio has dismissed criticism from former employees as not representing the views of most people at the firm. He has also taken issue with the unwillingness of most Bridgewater critics to speak on the record. Former employees are required to sign ironclad confidentiality agreements that include non-disparagement provision, which keeps many of them from talking about the firm. And Bridgewater provides a financial incentive for long-term employees to keep quiet about their tenure by offering them a phantom equity awards that enable them to participate in future earnings of the firm, even after they leave. Such awards effectively tie employees more closely to the success of the firm, according to an internal document reviewed by the Times. In its statement, Bridgewater described the Phantom Equity Awards as an incentive system that is designed for the long-term well-being of the firm. I think that's called bribery. Money, payoff. But yeah, this was that Wall Street article, and remember I said before, click here. The world's largest hedge fund is building an algorithmic model from its employees' brains. Yeah, this was the Fuller. Bridgewater's new technology would enshrine its unorthodox management approach in a software system. Let me go back and read that from before. The goal of its technology would automate most of the firm's management. It would represent a culmination of Mr. Dalio's life work to build Bridgewater into an altar to radical openness and a place that can endure without him. At Bridgewater, most meetings are recorded. Employees are expected to criticize one another continually. People are subject to frequent probes of their weaknesses, and personal performance is assessed on a host of data points, all under Mr. Dalio's gaze. Bridgewater's new technology would enshrine his unorthodox management approach in a software system. It could dole out GPS-style directions for how staff members should spend every aspect of their days, down to whether an employee should make a particular phone call. This system remains under development, and the exact details of its operations are still being debated inside the firm. One employee familiar with the project described it as like trying to make Ray's brain into a computer. Bridgewater manages $160 billion, the most of any hedge fund firm. It has earned clients twice as much total profit as any rival. A firm that puts clients' money into hedge funds, Mr. Dalio personally earned $1.4 billion last year, according to research firms Institutional Investors Alpha. Bridgewater's flagship fund, however, was down about 12% on the year at one point in 2016, causing alarm inside the firm. The fund has since recovered and being up 3.9%. In mid-December, a lower free fund was up 8.1%. Rules for Bridgewater staff are laid out in a 123-page public manifesto known as Principles, which every employee is expected to know and diligently apply, along with maxims such as, by and large, you will get what you deserve over time. The principles are filled with advice from Mr. Dalio, such as, don't pick your battles, fight them all. Bridgewater says about 1/5 of new hires leave within the first year. The pressure is such that those who stay sometimes are seen crying in the bathrooms, said 5 current and former staff members. This article is based on interviews with them and more than a dozen other past and present Bridgewater employees and others close to the firm. Mr. Dalio returned to Bridgewater earlier this year after stepping back to a mentor role 6 years ago. Within a few weeks, he gathered managers under a tent and said the firm had grown bloated and inefficient. The fix, he said, would be a renovation in which weak employees were let go. Staff cuts began almost immediately. Since his return, headcount is down by about 150 or 10%. Hundreds more may be cut to the coming months, though some are expected to be replaced. Eventually, the budget for the holiday party, which in the past has had elaborate decorations such as Christmas trees hanging inverted from the ceiling, has been trimmed by 20% this year. Stung by public disclosures earlier this year of internal tumult, Mr. Dalio changed a decades-old system of making all high-level deliberations and decisions known to every member of staff. Instead, he decided to only let around 10% have the full measure of what he calls radical transparency. He wrote a new principle, not yet public, that says, expect those who receive the radical transparency to handle it responsibly, and don't give it to them if they can't. When an employee challenged Mr. Dalio in an open meeting on whether the response was proportionate to the leaks, he replied that as the inventor of the firm's management system, he determined it was. And it just goes backstory. Mr. Dalio founded Bridgewater in 1975 as a research shop based in his 2-bedroom Manhattan apartment. He earned the attention for his ability to predict macroeconomic trends. The underpinnings to his success, Mr. Dalio often says, is his belief that the market reflects the workings of a misunderstood economic machine, and interpreting its mechanics requires a relentless and often painful dedication to getting to the truth through thoughtful disagreement. That's why employees are encouraged to challenge each other repeatedly and without reservation. Wonder how far Mr. Dalio would take his experiments. I wonder. The economy Mr. Dalio has written is really just a zillion simple things working together. Decades before computer-driven trading came into vogue, Bridgewater began tracking relations among what are now 100 million separate data points, such as international interest rates and retail sales, and creating an investment algorithms. The main hedge fund embodying these algorithms, Pure Alpha, uses the data to buy and sell stocks, bonds, currencies, and other assets. The fund has long anticipated booms and busts around the world, including the looming financial crisis as early as 2006, the firm told investors. Mr. Dalio also believes humans work like machines. Got to catch these little tidbits in here. This is one of them, like a little nugget. That's a new catchphrase, the nugget. Mr. Dalio also believes human works like machines, a word that appears 84 times in Principles. The problem, he has often said, is that people are prevented from achieving their best performance by emotional interference. It is something he thinks can be overcome through systematic practice. That applies to managing too. Successful managers design a machine consisting of the right people doing the right things to get what they want, he wrote in Principles. The Book of the Future software to automate management, a project Mr. Dalio has also sometimes referred to as the One Thing, later gained the more formal name of Principles Operating Systems, abbreviated PRIOS. It is an attempt to make management nearly as systematic as the firm's investigative process. Data are incorporated from a phalanx of personality tests that Mr. Dalio requires of his employees. In one, managers undergo written exams to determine their stratum as unconventional score for conceptual skills developed by the late Canadian-born psychoanalyst Elliot Jacques. James Comey, now FBI director, left a post as Bridgewater's general counsel telling colleagues his personality didn't fit. There he is. Did it not fit, or did you move on to other greater positions so that things could move along. As applied at the firm, questions include: what is the biggest problem Bridgewater faces today? The highest marks go to those found to have an innate ability to spot long-term trends. Mr. Dalio has the highest stratum score at Bridgewater, and the firm has told employees he has one of the highest in the world. Likewise, Bridgewater's software judges Mr. Dalio as the firm's believable employee in matters such as investigating and leadership, which means his opinions carry more weight. Mr. Dalio is always in search of new data with which to measure his staff. He once raised the idea of using headbands to track people's brain waves. According to one former employee, that idea wasn't adopted. The push to automate management addresses a larger challenge, which is how this culture would survive without Mr. Dalio, who is 67 years old. When he temporarily retreated from day-to-day management, Mr. Dalio spent weeks at a time away from his firm's Westport, Connecticut campus, indulging pursuits such as scuba diving, and until he gave it up, bow hunting. He bought a submarine equipment yacht, MV, for research expeditions in the open ocean. Well, that's interesting because that kind of navigation and exploration, well, now, that would seemingly, you would need some sort of oceanographer or someone who would be familiar and what do we have? No, this is another list of people who WikiLeaks list. I don't think this is the one I'm looking for. There was someone's name who came up in Sandy Hook who, interestingly, had a NOAA address, email address, which, can I find it now? Nope. I don't want to go through all that to see. Here's Greg Jensen. Ran afoul of his boss a year for allegedly talking about him beyond his back, which at Bridgewater is a sin second to only dishonesty. In a tribunal, the firm conveyed Mr. Jensen was found to have broken the rules. He lost his co-CEO title, but remains co-chief investment officer. I wonder why. Mr. Jensen declined to comment. Mr. Jensen. At the core of the technology project now is walled off, a group called Systemized Intelligence Lab, headed by David Ferrucci, who led the development of the artificial intelligence system, Watson, at International Business Machines Corp., before joining Bridgewater in 2013. Though outsiders expected Mr. Ferrucci would use his talents to help find hidden signals in the financial markets, his job had focused more narrowly on analyzing the torrent of data the firm gathers about its employees. The data include ratings employees give each other throughout the workday called dots. Isn't that weird? Isn't that weird, the analyzing of human behavior? It's probably time to go to their website and go from there. You can finish reading these in the description box, okay? They'll all be in there. Interesting, Mr. Dalio came out, CNN Money, and he had made a comment just in June of this year. Famed hedge fund billionaire Ray Dalio fears the world today looks an awful lot like it did before World War II. Dalio, who currently serves as Bridgewater's chairman and co-chief investment officer, didn't mention President Trump directly, but he cited a Bridgewater study that showed conflicts between the common man and the elites.
often take place during periods of time that sound like the current atmosphere.
Except Mr. Dalio is an elite.
Sorry, I know you can't be reading in my head. I'm sorry. I know I'm tired. I probably needed a break about I don't know how long ago. I'm just going on and on and on. Comey used to work for Dalio, serving as Bridgewater's general counsel between 2010 and 2013 before becoming the FBI director. Dalio has previously hailed Comey a man of integrity and a hero. So May of 2010, just so you know, this was interesting. Top billionaire hedge funder sees himself as a hyena devouring wildebeests. Yeah, that's kind of how I see him too. He says, I believe that self-interests and society's interests are generally symbiotic. That is why how much money people have earned is a rough measure of how much they gave society what is wanted. Tis quote, Ray Dalio is a billionaire hedge fund manager who makes more money in a single day than most. This was back in 2010. In a single day that an American will earn in their entire lifetime. That's because hedge funds are at the top of Wall Street's food chain. And Dalio runs the largest hedge fund of all, Bridgewater Associates. Life's good at the top of his food chain. In 2008, a bad year for most Americans, Dalio took home $780 million. That same $780 million could have paid the salaries of about 20,000 teachers. And those 20,000 teachers could have taught about 400,000 American students. It was an interesting article where he's asked Dalio's hedge fund, without those teachers pulling their money together, to which Dalio would answer, be a hyena, attack the wildebeest. He said, did you write that down yet? Because that's cruel reality, according to Ray Dalio, a self-described hyper-realist and the author of a bulky book of maxims leaked recently via the financial blog Dealbreaker, which I think I have a link to that in there too. Dalio titled his collection of maxims some 250 in all principles, which comes later. Boy, that's an interesting picture. You can read Dalio's principles thanks to the folks at Dealbreaker who leaked it last week. Imagine some Ayn Rand geek a few decades later and a few $1 billion richer, and you get Dalio's principles exemplified by his be a hyena maxim. When a pack of hyenas takes you down, when a pack of hyenas takes down a young wildebeest, is that good or evil? I believe this is going to probably be a good idea to pay attention here. At face value, that might not be good, because it seems cruel, and the poor wildebeest suffers and dies. Some people might even say that the hyenas are evil. Yet this type of apparently cruel behavior exists throughout the animal kingdom. Like death itself, it is integral to the enormously complex and efficient system that has worked for as long as there has been life. It is good for both the hyenas, who are operating in their self-interest and the interest of the greater system, including those of the wildebeest, because killing and eating the wildebeest fosters evolution, i.e., the natural process of improvement. In fact, if you changed anything about the way that dynamic works, the overall outcome would be worse. That is a quote from Ray Dalio, and I should probably leave that at this point. Do you see where I'm tying that into the mindset of who could be behind orchestrating a false flag event? Employees rate each other with using iPads. That's what they do, because it's all, and how much money they have and how they can pay people off. You know, how they can afford to do this, because people can be paid off. Maybe I should leave this here. There's just so much. Bridgewater paid over $1 million to an employee pushed out after relationship with Dalio's protege. This is just November 7th, 2017. This was just last week. Westport, Connecticut, Bridgewater Associates paid a settlement to a woman who was pushed out after engaging in a consensual relationship with a top executive, Greg Jensen, and shortly after it heard from another female employee that Mr. Jensen had groped her buttocks, according to people familiar with the matter. Everything's a matter. Mr. Jensen, 43 years old, was directly mentored by Bridgewater's founder, Ray Dalio, 68, and groomed over 2 decades to succeed him as leader of the world's largest hedge fund. At the time both incidents were brought to the company's attention, roughly 3 years ago, he was co-chief executive of the firm. He is now Bridgewater's co-chief investment officer, helping oversee around $160 billion in assets and hundreds of employees. The billionaire Mr. Dalio was personally involved in mediating both matters. People familiar with them said both women have since left Bridgewater and are barred by non-disclosure agreements from discussing their experiences publicly, the people said. Mr. Dalio approved a settlement of more than $1 million for the woman who had a relationship with Mr. Jensen, the people said. The woman who complained of being groped didn't leave Bridgewater because of the incident. It wasn't pushed out, the people said. She met with Mr. Dalio and continued her career elsewhere, they said. No lawyers were involved. Brian Snyder, Reuters Bridgewater founder Ray Dalio, was personally involved in mediating both matters. People familiar with them said. Mr. Jensen said in a statement, "The Wall Street Journal's accusations of my behavior are inaccurate and salacious. They are hurtful to my family and my reputation with those who don't know me. So I am deeply disappointed by their sense of responsibility." After online publication of this article, Mr. Dalio said in a statement, "I judged Greg to be a man of high character and would not have tolerated the pattern of behavior inaccurately described by the Wall Street Journal." Neither incident has been previously reported. A Bridgewater spokesman said in a statement, "This story is an uninformed misrepresentation of what actually occurred. While we are prohibited from speaking to this case, our track record speaks for itself because of the people, procedures, and culture we have in place. Bridgewater, over the course of its 43-year history, has had very few incidences of any type, handled them thoughtfully, comprehensively, and fairly, and has had no material adverse judgments." Westport, Connecticut-based Bridgewater is the world's largest and most successful hedge fund firm, having produced investment gains of over $49 billion for clients since 1975, more than any rival, according to LCH Investments, NV, a hedge fund investor. Bridgewater is known for its culture of radical transparency, which requires most meetings to be recorded and openly ranks employees on their weaknesses. Mr. Dalio has stated that his self-written principles is a list of rules for life and work, constitute a meritocratic management system he hopes to export to other companies. goes on to talk about Mr. Jensen. How between 2011 and 2016 he earned $1.7 billion in compensation. According to estimates from researchers, institutional investors Alpha, he pledged to invest a majority of his wealth into Bridgewater shares, including buying some of Mr. Dalio's stake in firm as the founder retreats from day-to-day management. Several current and former male and female Bridgewater employees said they were at times uncomfortable with Mr. Jensen's behavior outside of the office and at company events. At an official offsite company celebration in 2011, Mr. Jensen hired a stripper with a feathered boa to surprise Mr. Dalio on the dais in front of an estimated 1,000 guests, according to people present. They said the move appeared to reference a long-standing rumor, since confirmed by Mr. Dalio in his recently published autobiography, that Mr. Dalio was fired from an early job in part because he brought a stripper to a convention lecture. Story continues. But I had archived that, so have to go back and read that one. So this was just really, this is about him stepping down. I wanted to really, in this long video, Bridgewater's culture is like going to a nudist camp. This was written when? March earlier this year, 2017. Talks about his manifesto. Criticizes the New York Times. I wanted to just establish the connection between Comey and Dalio, and I wanted just to give you an understanding of this radical transparency that Dalio has and his mindset. And as I was reading to you before, the neuroscience and what's going on with trying to get inside people's heads and why that's important. There's some big names associated with Mr. Dalio, and this has been going on. I mean, this isn't anything new. Mr. Dalio sounded like Ron Hubbard, the hedge fund industry, Scientology, who seeks to turn followers into clears by eliminating their reactive minds. Mr. Dalio has developed a set of principles aimed at stopping employees from being emotionally hijacked by their instincts when criticized or contradicted, instead of reflecting with their brains, prefrontal cortexes. It sounds crazy. It's not. Maybe some of you are thinking that you don't see the connection. I wonder, does anyone else see this connection? You know, it's so obvious to me. This is a very good read here. Links will be in the description box. And this was just written September 17th, 2017. I have to take personality tests whenever you work there. And then I kind of came to this California shooting, you know. I'm not sure what's going on with those details. Rolling you through the rabbit hole box. The importance of principles. This is the manifesto here, and this is the entire 123-page manifesto, which is different than the summary that I also have. But I find it interesting that at the very beginning, the introduction, one of the first things, he says, so when digesting each principle, please ask yourself, is it true? Double entendre right there. Tells you what are principles. And there will be a link in the description box. Ben, and there's going to be a lot of links in the description, but sometimes I can't even fit them all in. A lot of things I didn't even speak about in this segment of it. But I, again, just wanted to establish the base of the people that, we're talking about here. It's a lot. I mean, I'm not going to obviously read a 123-page document, right? But it's, it would be definitely good to read. I've perused through some of it. Most fundamental life principles. Maybe what I'll do is I'll leave it there, and in my next video, I will maybe just focus on this 123-page document. I'll put the link in now for you, but that's where I'll leave it off at. So, all right, that's all for now. Have a good night. Bye.